Star Wars: The Clone Wars introduced many Star Wars fans to the Nightsisters of Dathomir, a powerful sect of matriarchal Force witches loosely aligned with the dark side. But the Nightsisters didn't originate in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, and the Witches of Dathomir were actually much more complex than the show lets on. Dathomir was a planet with an extremely long history, and the story of the Nightsisters and Mother Talzin's clan, the ones we see in the Clone Wars, is just a small part of it. Today, we'll be telling the full story.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Dathomir was an extremely biodiverse world, with environments ranging from shallow seas, grassy plains, and snow-capped mountains, to blistering deserts, temperate forests, and swampy jungles full of unusual flora. A dizzying array of creatures evolved on Dathomir, most notably the feared Rancor, and perhaps because of the density of life on the planet, Dathomir became a particularly potent Force nexus. Both the light and the dark sides of the Force were incredibly strong across different parts of Dathomir in wild and untamed forms, which were difficult for Force adepts to control. To the Witches of Dathomir, however, the planet was more than just a Force nexus. They believed it was a gateway, the planet where the border between the world of the living and the world of the spirits was closest. We'll discuss their beliefs about the spirit world in more detail later, but for now, just keep in mind that Dathomir was special. In the distant past, Dathomir was the home world of the Qua, a blue-skinned saurian sentient species with a particularly strong connection to the Force. The Qua became one of the galaxy's first major spacefaring civilizations by creating the Infinity Gates, mysterious Force-powered installations that essentially acted as portals between planets strong in the Force. The Qua traveled the galaxy, teaching the ways of the Force to many species. Unfortunately for them, however, one of the species they taught to use the Force were the Rakata. To the horror of the Qua, the violent, cannibalistic Rakata almost immediately fell to the dark side and became determined to conquer the galaxy. They demanded that the Qua hand over the secrets of the Infinity Gates, and when the Qua refused, the Rakata responded with war. The Rakata prevailed, but the Qua managed to destroy the Infinity Gates and retreat back to Dathomir before the Rakata could take over the network. This didn't stop the Rakata for long, however. They discovered their own method of space travel, inventing the first hyperdrives, and for 10,000 years, their infinite empire was the greatest power in the galaxy. They pursued the Qua back to Dathomir and destroyed their civilization, beating the Qua so badly that they eventually reverted back to an animal state, becoming the semi-sentient Roa Kui. The Rakata may have laid claim to Dathomir, but eventually their empire fell too, and for a time, Dathomir was abandoned. Throughout the Age of the Republic, numerous empires stumbled upon and sought to claim Dathomir for their own: the Piscians, the Sith, and eventually the Republic itself. But Dathomir refused to be tamed. The Piscian and Sith empires fell, and when the Republic laid claim to Dathomir, they didn't bother trying to settle it. Instead, Dathomir became a penal colony, where the Republic and the Jedi sent their most dangerous prisoners. One such prisoner was a fallen Jedi Knight named Alia. When Alia came to Dathomir in 600 BBY, the planet was ruled by the Rancors, vicious animals that all other exiles marooned on the planet lived in fear of. The other prisoners found themselves unable to slay the Rancors without technology, and so made easy prey for the beasts, which hunted them through the forests. But Alia managed to turn the tables. She found that she could tame the Rancors using the Force, forging special bonds with them and making them loyal allies. With this knowledge, she took control of what society existed on Dathomir. The males of the planet became slaves, while Alia trained the females as warriors, teaching them to use the Force and bond with the Rancors. The details of how exactly this transpired are confused by myth, but by the time Alia died, Dathomir, as the greater galaxy knew it, had been born. Alia had a lot of children, and over the centuries her lineage came to dominate Dathomiri society. By the time of the Clone Wars, this meant that the Dathomiri were almost all Force sensitive. Those women strongest in the Force led the various Dathomiri clans, and they were known to the galaxy as the Witches of Dathomir. These witches were divided into two sects: the followers of the Book of Lore, who held true to the teachings of Alia, and the followers of the Book of Shadows, who rejected what they saw as weakness and revisionism in the other clans. The latter were the Nightsisters, users of the dark side and forbidden techniques. The other witches rejected the dark side, as Alia had at the end of her life. Though the Nightsisters were more well known, they were greatly outnumbered by the other clans, who controlled most of Dathomir. The two sides fought semi-regularly. We're going to be focusing on the Nightsisters going forward, but there are a few ideological traits shared by both kinds of witches, so we'll be discussing those first. First and foremost, all of the Witches of Dathomir considered themselves the followers of Alia. The light side ones followed the laws she had laid down on her deathbed, while the Nightsisters claimed that these laws hadn't actually been written by Alia and followed what they saw as a truer, anti-revisionist path. Beyond their devotion to Alia, the witches had a number of other ideological commonalities. The taming and riding of Rancors was a major part of both cultures, as was a general devotion to nature and the wildness of Dathomir. Both practiced the Force in a shamanistic way, using incantations and alchemy to channel their powers. All witches lived in strictly matriarchal clan-based societies led by a clan mother and a shaman, and they all believed that males were inherently inferior to females, as only females were capable of harnessing both aspects of the spirit world. That leads us back to the most important commonality of the Witches of Dathomir, their unique take on the Force. The witches believed a spirit plane existed in parallel to the material world, inhabited by the essences of all living things. On Dathomir, where the boundary between the two worlds was thin, they could commune with the spirits and gain strange and unique powers from them. The witches saw the Force as just a weak manifestation of the spirit's power, and through their unique shamanistic approach to the Force, they were able to harness the raw power of these spirits, often in the form of mist-like green ichor. The shamans of the witches claimed to see both worlds at once and to speak for the spirits. Some claimed that the spirits tugged at their robes as they walked, and that their voices could be heard beneath their own when they spoke. Beyond that, however, was where the beliefs of the Nightsisters diverged from the other witches. Like other Force traditions, the other witches divided the powers and energies of the spirit world into good and evil, but the Nightsisters rejected this dichotomy. They saw the others shunned as evil, as just a more aggressive side of nature, and believed that it was required to tap into both aspects of the spirit world in order to keep nature in balance. Like with other Darksiders, this belief was mistaken, but within the context of Dathomir, it was a bit closer to the truth, since the spiritual powers of the witches worked a bit differently from the Force itself. The witches attributed the bulk of their powers to the twin deities, the winged goddess and the fanged god. The winged goddess was depicted as a white griffin, while the fanged god was sent to resemble a shadowy gargoyle. If those descriptions sound vaguely familiar to you, it's because they likely are. They describe the daughter and son of Mortis. Like the daughter and son, these two deities are associated with but not direct manifestations of the light and dark side. Both embody aspects of human nature, the selfless and the selfish respectively. For more on what the difference is, we'd recommend checking out our video on the true meaning of the Mortis arc. The other witches rejected the fanged god, but the Nightsisters embraced both deities, calling on each for different powers. It was through the winged goddess that the witches practiced their higher techniques. These included the conjuring of spirit ichor, the creation of objects or weapons from ichor, divination, healing and rejuvenation, mind control and bonding with rancors, and the revival of corpses. Communion with the winged goddess required concentration and a clarity of mind. The fanged god, on the other hand, was said to be much easier to commune with, as he seeped through the border between the material and spirit realms. The Nightsisters believed he was with them whenever they thought, hunted, feasted, or suffered. He was seen as a spirit of wildness, of raw emotion and power. Channeling his magic sometimes burst blood vessels in the bodies of the users, leaving characteristic bruises on the face. This was seen as a sign of shame by the other witches, but the Nightsisters took them as a sign of pride. These marks were where the Dathomiri tradition of tattoos came from. Both the Nightsisters and their Night Brother counterparts were tattooed in imitation of the marks left by channeling the fanged god. Once a year, the Nightsisters believed that the power of the fanged god allowed spirits to cross over into the material world during the Wild Hunt, when they roamed the forests and kidnapped mortals to bring back to the spirit world. It was from him that they drew their darker techniques, especially their methods of hunting and their blood rites. The most notable of these was the technique known as blood trail, which allowed Nightsisters to track beings across the stars by marking them with their blood. It was also from the fanged god that the Nightsisters likely drew their most well-known techniques, their abilities of illusion and the creation of mind-rending visions. The veracity of Alayan magic, as the witch's ideology is sometimes called, and the specifics of its relation to the Force are unknown. However, it's clear that the Witches of Dathomir had access to something simultaneously distinct from, yet every bit as potent as the more conventional Force techniques of the Jedi and the Sith. So, that's our look at the untold secrets of the Nightsisters, the other witches, and Dathomir as a whole. There's still more to explore with this topic if you're interested, so if you'd like to see that in future, feel free to post your thoughts in the comments below.